Ciao, I'm Vladimir Chernikov, FIDE Master, and we'll talk about the World Cup. Arjun Erigaisi eliminated today by Wei Yi. It means that another very high seed player will not make it to the candidates. Since we know that this was the quarter-final match between two high-seeded players left on the tournament, as I remember, and the loser one was eliminated, and other guy is proceeding to semi-finals and has very big chances to qualify for candidates. As we know from World Cup, 3 seeds, 3 spots, top 3 will go to the candidates, and 4th place just will be eliminated. So going to semi-final will almost guarantee you a lot of chances. Very tough, because as we talked with Vladislav in other videos, that the brackets were kinda not unfair, but okay, that's what happened, right? High-seeded players from upper bracket were eliminated from upper part of the bracket. So we got Uzbekistan semi-final between Sindarov and Yakuboyev. The guys deserved it. Sindarov managed to win tie-break against Jospim, Jose Martinez Alcantara, a very strong blitz player. And in the same time, Yakuboyev passed Donchenko, that was already playing badly in previous round, so probably he just got tired. And the other one will be Andrei Yesipenko, that eliminated Sam Shankland versus Wei Yi in this case. But since the most hyped and the most interesting match definitely was between top 1 players by rating from India and China, definitely it's great to look what happened in these games. So we'll start from this game that probably was one of the strengths of Erigaisi. I mean, just the time control. Like, you will not see the time here, but first game doesn't make much sense to watch, just because Arjun was in preparation for almost whole game until it ended up in the draw. We'll see it right now. So for now, let's say this is pretty well known by anyone. And then we reach this position where after queen b5, Arjun needs to find basically only one move, knight to d4. It's not difficult tactics, obviously, that if queen d7, knight f3 intermediate check, and then we take. And if knight takes and defends the queen on b5, we can simply take knight back. And then after queen d7, knight d7, it's a drawish position, because yeah, c takes d4, looks like white's up a pawn, but after bishop f6, pawn is immediately gets targeted. Let's say if you play rook d1, there are a lot of different options to reach the draw. One of them is taking directly and then going rook a1, so black recovers a piece. If white plays bishop e3, for instance, then rook a2, and yes, we can stay and kind of defend it, but at least we can maybe have this kind of like position where we simply repeat, knight is pinned, have to go back, rook a2 again, and yeah, that should be completely equal. So after it, that's what was played in the game. Instead, rook b8 was played. Maybe Arjun wanted to push a little bit, but yeah, I mean, a game became a draw almost instantly. For you to understand, at this time Arjun has 1 hour 33 minutes on the clock, more than when game started, and we already finished the game. That was the strongest part of Arjun and of all the Indians player. Like Daniel Dubov said in his interview that like I was preparing 10 minutes with my phone against Prague, and this guy probably sitting always and checking all the lines. That's actually true. I mean, Indian players are well known that they like to prepare a lot for the games, that they study theory, but for me that is, I mean, obviously, no doubt, it's not attack to your Arjun Erigaisi. Like, if you can use your computer, everyone can use it, right? So why to not get advantage, right? I feel like it's just more problem of chess overall, that, for example, we see these kind of games. I remember also a game versus Arjun versus Peter Leko, first games that they played, Leko absolute legend, and then also Arjun had Leko into his preparation with black, and they draw again with Erigaisi having a lot of time on the clock, more than the game started once again, and Leko just realized that if he plays on, he plays against computer, not even against Erigaisi, so he took a draw. So these kind of games I wish will happen less and less with the time. And now we go to the most interesting part, the tie break. Second game of classical chess was literally too boring, so I just skip it. And we go to the most interesting part. So Wei Yi starts with white pieces, and he prepares some kind of interesting novelty. In the French, we play this, and surprisingly, here h4 is played. Very interesting move. Idea is simply to mate in this game, like knight g5, queen h5, and mate, basically. Now we know that that might be an interesting approach playing against someone like Arjun, because we know that Arjun likes attack, right? And here he doesn't have it for sure. He needs to show his defensive skills, but since he has very good calculation here, probably it was still he would hope for the draw. But for example, he plays 6 already here, and for you to understand, computer already raises evaluation around +1 because of knight g5. It says kind of that it was too slow. Because what it suggests is to go knight c6, I mean very direct move. Is the idea that after knight g5 we can simply play d4, forking to pieces. So you directly stop this play. Yeah, there is move h6, but you know, that's typical way that first of all sometimes even knight g5 can be played anyway with the idea of like mating here. But except of it also g4, and you know there is a saying, try to not move pawns in the side where you're more weak than your opponent. Because you create a hook, you create point on contact on g5, that it will be easier for white to open up the defense of black. So yeah, it was already complicated. He plays 6, knight g5 is played, and f6. Again, according to computer, you need to play queen c7, allowing all these queen h5s and so on. But I understand that from human perspective, when you get under attack, what you want to do is escape from it, right? And Arjun plays f6. Here take happens. Obviously computer shows some crazy lines like queen h5. I'll just show you attacking h7 pawn, and let's say if I say I'll take the pawn, pawn takes, then we'll take. It's true that king will start running. It's not like that we'll get immediately mated, but apparently after queen h7, castle long, the attack is too strong on white's king, or black's king, excuse me. The pieces are on the last rank. For example, right? But I understand also very normal continuation. E takes f6, rook f6 looks a bit awkward, but it's only move, because if you take with the bishop, then knight's hanging on c5. If you take with the pawn, then after queen h5, that's already a different story, because now attack becomes too strong. Now we directly target the h7 pawn, and after rook f7, g6 we just pass through. I mean, we can still play on, but like, I mean, a rook here, but then bishop d4, pawn takes, like whatever basically, right? Black is losing here, so rook f6 is forced move. Queen h5, threatening mate. Rook h6 not possible because of queen to f7. h6 once again looks like only move, and now bishop d4. Again, it's don't look at this evaluation, because it's chess.com was putting it before. Sometimes I mean, it's almost around as strong as castle long. That was another option given by computer. After knight bd7, I mean, for you to understand, right, the bishop f8 is supposed to be played to take here with the queen. But in position where you get under attack, the last thing that you want is just to stay passively, to waste another tempo just for this detail. Always, like, you want bring more pieces to the game, right? So that's very normal. And here again happened the move that for now, I can't criticize Wei Yi for. He just simply gets an exchange. Probably castle long was objectively stronger. The rook kind of will not run. But, I mean, you win exchange, you have zero risk of losing the game if something gets wrong, and you keep attacking. What was a surprise for me is next move of Wei Yi, that queen takes f6. Obviously, some of you can say, what is this? He blundered a queen. Obviously not, because then there is a fork, and he recovers it. And basically he say, you know, I understand his strategy. He said, I have exchange, again, zero risk to lose here, and I just go for this endgame and try to pressure. But objectively, let's not forget about main chess principles that are control of the center, that's round equal here, development of pieces, more or less the same thing, and safety of kings. We see clearly that this king on h8 is under very strong pressure. What white should have done is to simply play castle long here. Obviously knight is untouchable, that's absolutely clear, right? Knight h7, g6, and mate almost on the next move. So that's not the way. I mean, and you almost always have these tactics. You have queen g6 idea, you can continue attacking, but okay, he goes for the endgame. It was his strategy for the game, basically. Castle f5. Yeah, putting pawn, it looks like awkward move that leaves e5 square weak for no reason, basically. But Now Arjun understands that his bishop, dark square bishop, opponent doesn't have dark square bishop, so he needs to activate exactly this piece as much as possible, because it doesn't have rivalry. Bishop comes to f6 at some point, but here he went also to go to c7, so depending what white will be doing, because for example in f6 we can target here, but in the game he played here, so also he created a weakness, he blocked it on f4. Now this pawn is not possible to move. And yeah, you can ask, why not g3? g3 looks so simple, but the problem of g3 is that for white to really progress in this position, you know, in the queen side black is absolutely fine, so white needs at some point to push g4, and if I play g3 and this pawn will be always protecting on f4, that's not happening. Computer suggests directly throw this pawn, play g4, and it's really logical. Like if we see the very forced and totally moves line, we arrive here where, yes, white gave up another pawn, but at the same time white has very open position. Yes, opponent has bishop pair that is strong in open position, but these pieces are simply underdeveloped. Alright, we play rook g1, rook f1, you know, putting pressure. e5 almost never possible to play because the pawn will be hanging, like position of black collapses. But again, I understand, doesn't want to give up a pawn. He said, well, I play rook f1, I defend my pawn, and next I'll hold g4, who will stop me. Actually no one, because in few moves that's what was played. g4, here again computer says it like, okay, knight e4, blah blah blah, but maybe should be 7 decent move. We want to bring the rook to the game. And g4 is played, so we go to this position more or less, and yeah, here comes the most important moment of the game, where Wei Yi lost his huge advantage that he had in this position. He had to find the idea of playing b4 or rook g1 check first. No, b4 stronger, and so b4. What's the idea? I mean, if you take the pawn, then we see that black becomes very active, right? It's absolutely clearly the 4 is hanging. We don't want to take on this pawn. But if you play b4, we simplify position. Knight cannot be moved because we'll take the pawn for free after it. And if pawn takes intermediate, very important, check rook g1 for this rook to not be hanging. And wherever king goes, let's put it somewhere there. Obviously f6 probably better, but doesn't matter. Idea is that we take, our rook is not longer hanging on f1. This pawn will fall as well, and here already it's absolutely clear that white is completely winning. Also you can do it reverse, you can start from rook g1 check and then play b4. So was played move knight g3, king f6. Now still before was kind of idea, because at least knight not hanging, but yeah, he decided to take, and then we end up in this position. That is already not that easy, even though computer gives some advantage for white, still it's very hard to play, right? And we reached to this endgame. In the end of the day, at some point even black can start to play for win, because two bishops, very advanced pawns, very active king. White should be careful, but we arrive to this interesting endgame where white has two pawns and king versus two bishops and rook. Very important to know here that yeah, looks like this is winning the bishop, but there's obviously intermediate check, so that's not happening. In general, if we trade rook for one of the bishops, it's still a draw. Like, we need our king to win this endgame, king and two pawns versus one of the bishops. We need our king being much more advanced and pawns as well. So yeah, even it's not an option, and they tried to play on a little bit, but I mean, it was a draw, and Arjun perfectly showed how to do it. And they end up in this position, and yeah, this endgame doesn't have much to be played. So draw, Arjun escaped here, and Wei Yi probably was a little bit disappointed of what happened, and then they went to another game. That here I would say that Wei Yi played almost the whole game brilliantly. We'll see what happened, right? So Arjun starts white. That actually became a game why he became eliminated in the end. So it's Petrov, and okay, we go for some theory once again. We hold this position, and we reach this pawn structure, right? It can be that d5 pawn in the future can become a weakness, right? If bishop will end up on f3, will be pressure on this pawn, because this pawn is weak, because there is no other pawn that can protect this pawn. In the other hand, white has double pawns that are stuck, so imagine some rook endgame where rook just comes here, picks up all the pawns, black has pass pawn and completely winning, right? So So this is very interesting structure that is very unbalanced and can be interesting like to play it for both sides. So white plays bishop h6. Okay, we don't follow the trick. If c takes d3, you can pause the video. I mean, it's very easy, but those of you who just starting, pause the video please and try to solve what happens in this case. Yeah, queen f6 obviously, right? That's a mate in one. Okay, you can avoid it being mate in one, but obviously doesn't help. So needs to be played rook d8, very important, not rook e8, because then after takes, not removing the bishop, but queen takes d5, attacking the bishop here. And then if black probably can do something like that, but yeah, I mean, that's this position is, I mean, close to resigning. I mean, if pawn takes, whatever wins here. So yeah, rook d8, that's why for queen to be protecting. Now if queen d5 don't do it, there is x-ray and queen gets lost on d5. So now time to retire with the bishop. Could be played queen f6 earlier, and then after bishop f8, bishop e2, but it's the same. Right, so queen f5, g4, and they come to this endgame. Computer likes a little bit more white's position, but again, as I said, it's very double-edged. It looks very drawish, right? And with computer violations that always say 0, 0, 0, it's still a lot to play here. So bishop e6, a4. Arjun tries to win some space. I just want to show it kind of fast because to reach to the most important moment of the game, that there will be some. So bishop d6, they continue playing. Rook b5, putting more pressure, as I said, on this weak pawn. Black defense. Looks almost impossible to lose this game with white, but it's true that when Indian players playing it, it's always possible, because we know that obviously they're all strong guys, but like Gukesh as well, like the endgame that he lost versus Swane in Frederick Swane in the third round. I mean, the problem is clearly endgames there. Like, they need to study it more, because they're very good in dynamics, in theory, but when it comes to last part of the game, somehow they can't deliver. Bishop c1 was played. The idea of bishop c1 is simple, right? Bishop is good, but we can also, for example, bring it here. We can open some space to push some pawns after it. Then bishop d1, it looks like all the pieces going home, let's say, but also idea that is f4. Very interesting, right? Arjun wants to push this position. If he want to draw, probably he can simply stay and doing almost nothing, but he realized that where I can progress. I mean, a5, probably black even can take it, but even here I'm thinking maybe even worse because of a6, right? And then rook's hanging, intermediate, that's typical idea, and then b5, and suddenly these pawns are too strong. But I mean, we can play like rook back and then a5, but it doesn't give much progress. So he decided to push pawns, maybe to create some attack or create some weaknesses around black kings. That's why also he brought both bishop back, and now he plays f4. But f4 is already not a mistake, obviously, but you know, probably he became a little bit careless. The problem of f4 is that now this pawn on g4 becomes weak, and it's central pawn. There is a typical rule in chess that there are 3 pawns in the same file. In the same rank, excuse me, we need to hit the middle one of them. Idea that if this pawn, for example, obviously here it's like I'm losing a pawn, right? But for instance, let's say g5, like if we reach this, then a lot of weak squares appear here, and probably it was too risky. But okay, f4, and then rook back to d8, rook b1, bishop d7, again some trades are happening. We go here, g5, again, hg5, computer doesn't like it, but trust me, it kinda let Wei Yi opportunity to win the game in the end, so I think in practical point of view it was good. And then we come to this position that I don't know what happened. Probably the question is for all of you who has more advanced level to find the best move for black here. I mean, we have obvious things that first of all we need to evaluate the forced moves. Bishop takes c2 cannot be more forced, right? We win a pawn. What white will do? Obviously he will recover pawn, right? And then white will have a protected pass pawn here, and we trading. Yes, our pawn is weak here, but we traded for also another doubled weak pawn. What black definitely should have done here, I mean, even I as a FIDE master understand it. I mean, it's move bishop e4 clearly. What's the idea that we keep this pawn? Why this pawn is weak? Who attacking this pawn? Only this bishop. I mean, other pieces just can't like reach there. Maybe someday rook will come like that, but not more than this. With this move we trade the best white bishop, and we leave with the rook that's much better. We left with rook that's much better than opponent's rook, and our bishop is much better than this one that has almost all the pawns on the same color of squares as him. Yeah, that's it's completely domination, right? The position is domination. You can improve, put pressure on c7 more. So with this you will tie, let's say, you'll tie, okay, this by the way will lead to rook e1, right? So I need to be careful, and then I go here. And for example, I can already win the pawn, because once again, if king f3, always there's idea of rook e1, we can try to play bishop b2, but this is completely hopeless. Just compare the bishop, see this pawn on a4, that's weakness. I mean, black can win with almost any move, but since white cannot progress in this side, probably the interesting idea will be just go and try to take the a pawn, for example. So I mean, that's a very simple chess. And then you can see also the difference, right? Yes, we can trade this, and now we can play bishop e4 as well. But then difference is obvious, that after pawn takes and rook takes, that this rook is much more weak on this square. Before I cannot kick it out, but you can say, well, but if I try to do it rook e1 again. Yes, but the difference is that first of all, endgame already, it's not that winning. Because without these two pawns, white has a strong counterplay and much better king, first of all. Second, also, that if I don't want to allow it with white, I can play this move. Let's say white plays, okay, if this we can probably start counterplay, but imagine that like black does something, so then I play bishop e3, and now I play king f3. Like in previous position, even this will not be big progress, because there was pawn on d5, rook remains very strong, a lot of pressure. Now rook has to be moved, right? Because it's not an outpost anymore without pawn on d5. It was pretty obvious, but for some reason, Wei Yi traded it, probably was only a mistake, and then he went bishop d3. Okay, I mean, still I'll prefer black every day of the week, but yeah, that's shouldn't be played for sure. And then we come again to this position, then bishop e3 was played, rook h8. Now, as I said, right, that finally you see that when Wei Yi traded these pawns, computer didn't like it, but in human perspective it gives you the open file for use later on. Bishop g2, rook h4, and now another important moment of the game. Here I try to understand why like d5 move right now is not that strong, but it was a transposition. The idea is either you first play f5 or d5. We'll see now why it's happening. Yes, black definitely wins a pawn, and now we play a5. Right? Idea now that we create a counterplay. I mean, if we start with a5, the same thing here. Also, if pawn takes, these two pawns become weak, right? If we trade this bishop, then rook enters and takes these pawns, right? So that's more or less what was happening in the game. So bishop takes e3, king e3, b5, and now comes the most, probably like one of the most difficult moments of the game. I try to realize why this is big mistake, according to engine, and playing this move directly, it's almost a draw. Interesting, right? So as I understood, as I found out, it even took me time to check it with an engine, so for you to understand, it's not like terrible mistake. Idea is that if a6 is played in this line, without including rook f2, d6, king e6, bishop b7, takes, and it's around equal. But what is the difference? If we give check first, bishop f5 is played, a6, king e6, and now bishop b7 was not played. The point behind it is that without bishop on d3, black will have rook h3 check, and the c3 pawn becomes extremely weak. Let's say if king d4 trying to protect it this way, after king d6 we win straight away because we're threatening mate in one move. So to avoid it I have to play rook d2, and then after simple trade we threaten to run away with the pawns, and then we run away eventually with the pawns. I mean, this, king c6, bishop is locked, and the two pawns doing the job. If I try to defend it going to d2, then after rook d3, I lose the c3 pawn, and then b and c pawns become pass pawns and definitely win the game on the spot. So that was small difference that Arjun didn't see it, but obviously it was hard, I mean, to expect him to see it with 30 seconds on the clock. He just decided maybe this check was to accumulate the time, or I don't know what was another option, but he decided to do this, and it was unfortunate. So after it, the game became complicated. Now bishop d3 was played. Again, apparently after king d7, it's hard to offer move for white, because before c3 is constant threat. Let's say if I host this, we play before, take, pawn runs very fast. Let's say we'll see that will happen more or less what happens in the game. And bishop d3 looks like not a strong move, because now like black is not progressing much. Yes, we want to take the pawn, but it's a little bit too slow. So probably this line can be tried, right? It can be tried. But okay, still bishop d3 remains looking good. And here comes important moment. I think it was here. Yeah, rook h7. Rook h7 almost blows big advantage away, and it's very interesting why. Again, for those of you who like to analyze these details in chess position, it will be a great moment to find the best move for white. Okay, so the move was rook to d5. It's brilliant and simple. What in this kind of position, I always say to my students, what we should do. We need to think what we can improve in our position. Bishop e7 is no longer a possibility because of rook being on h7. That was the purpose of this move. Our rook is already very strong. It defends the pawn. What we want is to make king become active, to activate it passing there, but it's not possible because king takes on d6. As I saw a lot of books, and by Jacob Aggart, one of my favorite authors, like he says that you need to dream. When you play chess, you need to have a dream. Like, let's say when you have ugly knight on b1 and outpost on d6. Right now, knight is ugly, but it can, in 3 moves, end up here, and then things will turn. So, the same story, I want to activate my king. What's the problem? That if I go here, I cut connection between my rook and the pawn. I'm bad in pointing arrows. So rook e5 first, and now already my king wants to pass. Additionally, rook from h4 went out. It's not cutting the black king anymore, white king anymore, and if you go rook h4, obviously it will be big blunder because of d7. So this move with the idea of going with the king was absolutely best, and last chance probably to save the game. For you to understand what black should have done, probably play king d7 first, because now after this move we can already start with b4 and our ideas, because king is running nowhere. So yeah, and yes, if you say again, like let's say rook h7, rook d5, king d7, now we see already that it's too late, king stopping all the counterplay. So yeah, and from here bishop c6 was played instead, a bit strange move, probably trying to play d7, that's what he wanted, but rook h3, very strong check, bishop d3, and now the pawn falls and the position actually falls. Like, I mean, going from here, it was a good technique by Wei Yi. He was not afraid that it's falling. Yes, he has very good bishop, he calculated it very well, right? Because last thing looks like you want to do is remove this strong bishop from big square, where you cover this pawn, where you stab b5 push, where you defend your own pawn, but without it you cannot progress. So he simply calculated that white is not on time. Let's say if bishop a6, there's rook b3 and rook b1, and it's free rook. I mean, the pawn's obviously running nowhere. I have to give up my rook, otherwise it will be queen. And I mean, all the black pieces are very near. Let's say with this move I can play king c7 whatsoever. So bishop f3 was played in order to stop rook b3, but then check and rook b4, and the rook reaches here anyway, and then game continued for some reason. But it's obvious, yes, that if white can, excuse me, take on a6, and while black is taking here, to take this pawn with the bishop, it will be a draw because my king is more near. But from where you can actually attack this pawn? Only from these 2 squares. And obviously after, like, you can try to go like to a4 or to b3. Obviously black will notice it and will stop it at one hand. Also here it's too slow, since it's too many moves. g5 can be played, and here it's even simply that king is not on time to stop the pawn because it's queening in advance. And if you try bishop c4 trick, let's say if this bishop b3, first of all, even this I believe is losing, but king c4 is more than enough because bishop simply always on time to stop the pawn. Then Erigaisi continued playing. I mean, here still there's maybe some, I know, chance for a miracle. Obviously position is lost. Black threatens king b2, forces white to go away, and goes now with the king to another side of the board, wins the bishop. Then here was a little bit disrespectful play by Arjun. I mean, you playing against 27-58 100 player, and you play like what you're hoping that he will not mate you with a queen and king and even a bishop. I mean, I understand that he was disappointed, but okay, let's show some respect to Wei Yi that played a good match overall, like brilliant match I would say, and get a win. So with this, there are no Indian players left, surprisingly, in competition, even though I would suspect them being very high. I remember when we were doing prediction with Vladislav, we put that Arjun and Pragnananda at least will go very far. That's haven't happened, but okay, Prag just lost his form to the close to the World Cup. And Arjun, I mean, he was playing well, crushing opponents. Again, a lot involved the theory, but then he made some players that avoid most of his preparation, even managed to surprise him. And in nowadays chess, it unfortunately matters too much. So what we had, that India will be represented just by one player in candidates, that will be Pragnananda, probably because of FIDE circuit, and then other 3 spots from this World Cup will be, as I said, divided between Wei Yi, Yesipenko, Yakuboyev, and Sindarov, being one of them who will not proceed to the candidates. Other players will join Pragnananda, Caruana, Nakamura, Bluebaum, and Anishgiri in the candidates tournament. I hope you liked the video. It was a little bit too long, but if you reach here, for sure you were okay, at least you are entertained. So put the like if you can, subscribe to channel if you are not yet, and we'll see you in the next video. Ciao!